For 3 decades, Johnny Carson sat behind the Tonight Show desk as the undisputed monarch of late-night television. Night after night, he welcomed Hollywood's biggest stars into America's living rooms with a mixture of charm, wit, and perfectly calibrated comedic timing that would set the standard for generations of talk show hosts to come. Millions tuned in not just for the jokes, but for the comfort of Carson's consistent presence. His monologues, interviews, and playful sparring with sidekick Ed McMahon created the illusion of a flawlessly controlled environment, one where nothing truly unpredictable ever happened. But behind that polished image was a recurring element of live TV chaos that even Carson couldn't always anticipate: celebrities who arrived at the studio thoroughly intoxicated. This was a different era of show business, before PR teams hovered over their clients, before every public misstep could be instantly immortalized on social media, and before networks developed the rigid risk management playbooks of today. Stars walked into NBC's Burbank studios without handlers, without rehearsed soundbites, and sometimes without sobriety. Occasionally, they were 3 drinks past good judgment by the time the cameras rolled. Today, we revisit the 8 most notoriously drunken appearances in Tonight Show history. Moments that network executives desperately wished viewers would forget, but which fans remembered for years. Some were hilarious, some uncomfortable, and some genuinely sad. But all of them showcased Johnny Carson's unmatched ability to navigate live television disasters with grace, wit, and a coolness that few hosts have ever replicated. So pour yourself something, though perhaps not nearly as strong as what these celebrities had, and settle in for a journey through some of Carson's wildest nights. When Truman Capote shuffled onto the Tonight Show set in 1980, viewers sensed instantly that something was off. Capote was one of the most luminous literary figures of the 20th century, brilliant, flamboyant, and known for his cutting commentary. The author of In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's had appeared on the show before, always delivering sharp, mischievous banter. But this time, the moment he emerged from behind the curtain, he looked unsteady. His steps were slow and uncoordinated, forcing him to reach for the back of the guest chair before lowering himself into it. From his very first line, it was clear he was severely intoxicated. Carson greeted him warmly. "It's great to have you with us tonight," but Capote's response was a slurred, jumbled murmur that Carson couldn't decipher. He leaned forward slightly and asked, with a strained politeness, "I'm sorry, what was that?" The studio audience laughed nervously. They already sensed this was not going to be a standard interview. Capote attempted to respond, but his words sagged and tangled together, like strings of holiday lights no one had bothered to untangle. He tried to discuss his latest writing project, but quickly drifted into a rambling, disjointed anecdote about Montgomery Clift. The story rose and fell in fragments, missing so many pieces that it felt less like a recollection and more like verbal confetti. Carson, a master of deciphering nervous guests and thick accents, could only blink in confusion. Even Ed McMahon appeared unsure of where Capote was going. The audience's discomfort grew by the minute. At one point, Capote glanced over at McMahon and asked, with drunken sincerity, "Can I sit in your lap? You look so comfortable, like a teddy bear." The audience erupted in a mixture of laughter and disbelief. McMahon froze, his smile tightening, while Carson raised his eyebrows in silent alarm. Carson tried desperately to maintain order. He asked direct, concise questions about Capote's writing process, his influences, his current work, anything that might anchor the conversation. But Capote simply couldn't latch on. His responses slid sideways into unrelated anecdotes or mumbled tangents. 6 minutes in, the interview had become a surreal exercise in miscommunication. Then came the low point. Capote attempted to sip from the glass of water on the table, missed the rim entirely, and poured a stream down the front of his shirt. He didn't acknowledge the spill, just continued speaking as though nothing had happened, now marked by a spreading wet stain visible to millions of viewers watching at home. Finally, Carson cut to commercial early, a rare move that only occurred during the most chaotic interviews. As the camera pulled back, it caught Carson exhaling in visible relief, unaware the director hadn't yet switched shots. Capote was never invited back during Carson's remaining years. The moment became infamous not because Capote was drunk, but because the contrast between his enormous intellect and the incoherence on display was so stark. It offered the public a painful glimpse of the personal demons that haunted his final years, a moment of brilliance slipping into unraveling tragedy. If Carson had a mental leaderboard of his most challenging guests, Shelley Winters would sit near the top, and possibly in her own category entirely. Winters, a two-time Academy Award winner, brought intensity and unpredictability into every room she entered. Audiences loved her for her boldness, her sharp opinions, and her complete lack of filter. Producers feared her for the same reasons, especially when she was drinking. And Winters drank often. In fact, she entered the studio intoxicated so frequently that Tonight Show staff developed a standing protocol: never schedule her first. Let other guests go first. Give her time to settle. Hope she sobered up, or at least plateaued. But Winters rarely sat quietly in her dressing room. She usually continued drinking right up until her cue. Her most infamous appearance, now legendary in Tonight Show lore, occurred in 1974. She was booked to promote her autobiography, but the instant she walked on stage, heels wobbling, expression animated, posture loose, viewers sensed this was going to be unforgettable. Carson greeted her warmly, but before he finished his first question, Winters launched into a long, rambling tale completely unrelated to her book. Carson attempted to redirect her gently, but she talked over him. She waved off his questions with dismissive flicks of her wrist. At one point, she physically turned her back on him to address the studio audience directly, as though she were giving an impromptu seminar. Then things truly went off the rails. When a young actor joined the couch to promote his first major film, Winters immediately interrupted his interview. She placed her hand on his knee, firmly, and announced, "His movie isn't very good, but he's pretty to look at." The entire studio recoiled. The actor's frozen smile barely masked his panic. Carson tried to move the interview forward, but Winters was unstoppable. She was the interview now. She talked over the actor, over Carson, and at one point, over the audience. The night's most shocking moment arrived when Carson attempted to regain control and glance at his note cards. Winters snatched them from his hand, threw them over her shoulder, and declared, "You won't be needing those, Johnny. I'm much more interesting." The audience gasped. Carson's jaw tightened, a telltale sign that he was losing patience. He shot a desperate look at Ed McMahon, who simply shrugged in helpless solidarity. When the chaos became too much to contain, Carson called for another early commercial break. Afterward, he told his producer, "If she's ever booked again, I'm taking the night off." Winters was effectively banned for almost 3 years. Her eventual return came with conditions so strict they sounded contractual: a noon taping time, limited access to alcohol, and a clear warning that any repeat of her previous behavior would result in permanent cancellation. Shelley Winters didn't show up drunk. She arrived like a storm front, loud, erratic, sweeping away the structure of the show and leaving Carson scrambling to rebuild some semblance of order. Dean Martin's public image was built on a lovable illusion: the tipsy crooner with a martini in hand, ready with a charming slur and a wink. For years, Hollywood insiders insisted the alcohol was mostly for show, the glass often filled with apple juice rather than gin. Martin's drunken persona was a performance, one he had perfected. But by the mid-1970s, that persona had begun to blur into reality. When Martin appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, it was supposed to be a promotional appearance for an upcoming NBC special. But the moment he walked on stage, swaying not with theatrical flourish but with genuine instability, it was clear something was wrong. This was no act. Martin nearly missed the chair as he sat down, then blinked at Carson with unfocused eyes. His speech, always tinged with playful slurring for effect, was now so thick that his first few sentences were nearly incomprehensible. Carson, who had introduced him with genuine enthusiasm, sensed the problem immediately. When Carson asked about the NBC special, Martin frowned and said, "What special?" Carson tried again, clarifying the name and details. Martin stared blankly before responding, "Oh, I thought I was here to talk to Merv." He had confused Carson's show with the Merv Griffin show. Carson attempted humor, "I can put on a wig if it would help," but Martin didn't react. Instead, he asked, "What time is it?" despite the interview being only a couple of minutes old. Then came the strangest moment of the night. Martin began singing "Everybody Loves Somebody" without prompting, then abruptly stopped and asked whether the show was being taped live. Carson, ever the professional, tried one more time with a safer topic: golf. Martin perked up, began a story about playing with Sammy Davis Jr., then suddenly asked, "When's Sammy coming on? Is he next?" Davis wasn't booked at all. Carson ended the segment early. Offstage, production assistants helped Martin exit. Carson was shaken. "That wasn't the Dean Martin we know," he reportedly said. It was heartbreaking. The beloved persona of the carefree drunk had transformed from charming illusion to painful reality. Raymond Burr was the last person anyone expected to see drunk on national television. As the star of Perry Mason, he embodied dignity, authority, and unwavering composure. His nightly presence in American living rooms made him synonymous with integrity, which made his disastrous 1970 Tonight Show appearance all the more shocking. Burr arrived at the studio 40 minutes late, an unprecedented offense for him. When he finally walked in, staff members saw instantly that he was intoxicated. Carson received the news mere moments before Burr's entrance and was visibly irritated. He reportedly considered canceling the segment but was persuaded otherwise. When Burr walked through the curtain, viewers gasped. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled, his face flushed. He steadied himself on the back of the chair before sitting with an audible thump. Carson began gently, asking about Burr's latest projects. Instead of answering, Burr launched into a long, winding monologue about his orchid collection, breeding, watering techniques, shade requirements, even details about his greenhouses in Fiji. None of it answered the question. Much of it barely formed complete sentences. For 10 agonizing minutes, Burr meandered from orchids to travel to unrelated philosophical musings about nature. Carson attempted repeatedly to rein things in, but Burr seemed either unable or unwilling to follow. The moment that sealed the interview's fate came when Carson, growing desperate, asked Burr about his experiences playing Perry Mason. Burr stared at him blankly and asked, "What did you say your name was again?" The studio froze. Carson recovered instantly. With a gentle smile, he extended his hand and said, "Johnny Carson. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Burr." The audience laughed in relief, but the tension lingered. As the segment ended, Carson leaned back with visible exhaustion. Backstage, he reportedly told his producer, he went from courtroom legend to cocktail liability in one night.